Okay, hear me out and let me know if you see the vision. I have really big plans for this project, but we're starting a little small. And yes, there will be a giveaway at the end, so stick around to see how you can enter, because there will be several winners, and I don't have a ton of viewers, so your odds of winning are pretty good. So imagine the dragons from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but as automata. So basically, an automaton is a kinetic sculpture. Usually they have some sort of internal mechanism, oftentimes turned by a hand crank, and that mechanism will produce some sort of repeatable movement that simulates motion. You may have seen Ali Spagnola make one on her channel recently, and if not, you should totally check out that video. It's really good. Unfortunately, I am fresh out of Builder Ran, but I think I could work out the flight pattern of a Chinese-style dragon pretty easily on my own, so I'm going to try that. But that is getting way ahead of myself. First, I gotta design some dragons. And of course, I do most of my organic modeling in Nomad Sculpt. And my basic process is usually just to start with simple shapes and then cut them down and manipulate them with different tools to get them looking how I want. I kind of look at it like machining, where I'm breaking things down one step at a time and slowly molding it into the piece I'm looking for. But I do want to say that I don't really know what I'm doing. A lot of it is just trial and error. I actually first discussed this project idea with my brother in May of 2023, but I didn't put it on the blog, and that's because I didn't really think I had the skills or the confidence that I needed to pull it off. And it's only because of this channel and the support from my viewers like you that gave me the motivation to develop those skills. And there are other skills that I really want to develop further and work on as well. So consider subscribing to the channel for more awesome projects just like this one. Now back to the sculpting. I have 4 dragons that I want to make in total. The original 3 from Breath of the Wild, Dinral, Farosh, and Nadra, and then I also want to add the light dragon from Tears of the Kingdom. Fortunately, they all seem to share about 90% of the same features, so I think I can get away with sculpting 4 different heads to go on one standard body. And I want mine to be print in place, just like those flexible dragon prints that flooded the 3D printing space, but there's a lot of work to be done in Nomad Sculpt to get to that point. I'll be honest, it took a while to get to this point, but I think it's a pretty good place to check in. And if it looks too big, that's because it is, but I counted in game, and this is how many spikes and body segments I would need to make it to scale. And since I can't make them life-sized, I did want to make it to scale if possible, but unfortunately I had to scale the actual model way down to be able to get it to fit on an actual build plate, at least the standard size of a build plate. And that was with a pretty dramatic curve here, so I really don't think I could make it any bigger and keep it this length. And confirming those suspicions, this is what it looks like printed out. And honestly, it's not too bad. It's got some good motion, but it is a little too small and snake-like for what I was envisioning. So not a bad first attempt, but back to the drawing board. And that drawing board gets us this. Several segments were removed, and I scaled it up, and it's looking a lot better already, but let's see if it's good enough. Not quite. We are almost there, getting a lot closer. I do think it is still a little too long, but it's looking good. I added Dinral's horns on there just because I couldn't help myself, but I think there is still a little more design work to be done. All right, so here's hopefully what is the final iteration, since I don't think I can make it any shorter than this. You can see that I've removed several of the body segments, and I've scaled it up so that, again, it fits nicely on the build plate. And this curve is much less dramatic, so hopefully that should make it a little easier to print in one piece. The reason I don't think I can make it any shorter is because of the legs. If we check out the concept art, you can see that the first 2 pairs of legs are pretty close together up front on the body, and the last pair is pretty far back. And the only way I can maintain that ratio is by putting the first set of legs right up behind the head and having the second set here. That leaves me this body segment where I can put the 3rd pair of legs. Otherwise, if I made it any shorter, that ratio would be off and I think it would look wrong. So hopefully this will look good. We'll print it out and we'll see for sure. And there we have the final version printed out, and I gotta say I'm pretty happy with it, at least the scale of it. You can compare against the last one we had that was still too long, but I think this is actually a really good size for a desktop automaton model. So pretty happy with that, except for the arms. You can see one of them actually broke off, and that's because I want this model to be completely print in place, which means that the leg sections will print flat on the build plate, and then I want them to drop into place when you lift it up, and I just didn't quite nail that tolerance as I was modeling that in. So back to the drawing board we went, and I got this version, printed out just this segment to save filament and time, And the tolerances are much better. You can see the legs actually fall into place here. But a couple of issues with this one are that the belly section is far too thick to let the legs fall fully into place. And then I also realized that the hands are pointing in the wrong direction. So when they fall, it'll kind of look like that, which is not what I was going for. So I did one more design iteration where I fixed those issues, and now they fall into place just fine. And that's because I was able to thin out that belly section a lot, and I swapped the arms around, or the hands rather, so now they look much more natural and much more dragon-like, in my opinion. And for one final version, I did 2 segments because I made a second version of the legs, because in the concept art and in game, the front and the hind legs are slightly different, so I just wanted some variation there. So that's what it looks like, and I kind of like this thing on its own. It looks like a skag from Borderlands. Now let's talk about colors. I originally decided to print them in 2 colors each. That felt like a decent balance of getting a good end product without having to paint in between each of the individual joints, while also reducing the amount of waste. I can't afford an H2C. But unfortunately, I was about to make a mistake that I didn't realize, because I was using this concept art for a reference for the colors to use. Using white for the main bodies, I also picked out an additional color that could be used as a good base for both the belly and the legs, as well as the horns and spikes. Again, going off of the concept art for Feroche, I found this bronze filament that I think will look really nice as the belly and the limbs. And then I can also use it as a base for the dorsal spikes as well as the main horn. And then I just need to dry brush some yellows and greens over the top of that to make it look right. For Dinnerall, I found this really nice rust color that would serve as a really good foundation for some oranges and reds in the horns and spikes. And then for Nadra, I have this really nice teal that really only needs some icy blues dry brushed on top to give those horns and spikes a good look. So I 3D printed them, and I was really happy with how these were looking until I 2D printed the reference art that I was going to use to help paint them. And wow, they look very different. And I should have known that because concept art rarely ever matches the final result, but I wasn't thinking about that at the time. You can tell that they look a lot different. For instance, on Dinnerall here, they went with more of a gray purple on the belly instead of this rust color, so that's not looking great. Nadra doesn't look too bad, although they went with a lighter teal for the belly than they did in the concept. And then the dorsal spikes and the horn are a lot darker. And then Feroche might just be the worst, because the belly is not this bronze color at all. It's more of a gray blue, and because of that, it doesn't work that well for the horns and the dorsal spikes either. I should have just printed those in yellow. So unfortunately, I think I need to go back to the drawing board on all 3 of these again, but we'll get there. So to save on filament, I started by trying to paint it, and of course that put me exactly in the position I didn't want to be in, having to paint in between all of these body segments, which wasn't looking too great. And I decided again, what's the point of using the bronze if I'm going to paint over the bottom and the top bronze in yellow? So I figured might as well try printing it in yellow. So I did that, and I painted it again on the bottom, and you can see I've experimented with painting the horn on this one as well. And this one is looking a lot better, but still not up to my quality standards. Again, painting in between these sections, it just didn't make much sense. So at this point, I decided that I probably did need to go ahead and print these again in 3 colors. So I tried that out with a blue that I already had, and I've painted the nails on, but all of this is printed otherwise. And while I do think we're getting closer to the concept art, this blue just isn't right. So not only am I going to have to print them all again in 3 different colors, I am going to have to do better at color matching the filament. So got to go buy some filament, repaint them in the slicer, and see what we come up with. And here's what I came up with. You can see on Dinnerall, I've swapped out the limbs and belly for this gray purple, which looks pretty good. On Nadra, I have this nice icy blue to contrast the teal that we already have. And then on Feroche, I have swapped out all bronze for this nice cool gray blue, which I think much better reflects the color that is actually present on the in-game model. And it's kind of blowing my mind, because if you asked me prior to starting this project what color Feroche was, I would have told you green, and there is no green in here whatsoever. Of course, we'll add some of that with supplementary painting, but that comes next. First, we got to get them printed. So much better already. You can see just how much closer we've gotten to the in-game model compared to where we were. And of course, there's still a long way to go. Some extra painting will need to be done, but I actually think we can take it to the next level. And that's because in the games, these dragons glow. They are luminescent, and that is one of the coolest aspects of their design. And I actually have some experience there since my first YouTube video on this channel was all about the glow. It's a rare instance where I don't recommend you watch that video. It is not good. But because of that video, I have a ton of paints that are designed to glow under a UV light, along with markers, powder pigments, and oh, paint. Did I mention paint? I have a ton of paint. But there should be something in this mix that will help our dragons look nice and glowy. Unfortunately, I have the perfect test pieces to practice with, and I've done quite a bit of practicing, so here's where we are so far. I do have this UV light here that I can kind of give you an idea of how things are looking, and it looks better when the lights are off, and it looks better in person compared to on camera, but I think this gives a pretty good idea of where we are at this step of the process. So just going through some of the decisions that I've made and some of the practicing that has led to results. I did find this yellow paint that is translucent enough to where it doesn't really change the color of these spikes or the main horn, but it still gives a really nice bright glow under a UV light. Again, it's hard to show that on camera, but I think that gets the idea across. And I've also done that on the spikes here, but for the horn, for this one I used the Citadel Colors Technical Paint. It's Tesseract Glow. And like the name suggests, it glows really well under a UV light. And it makes the horn a little more green, which I think matches the in-game art a little better. This is more of a chartreuse compared to the deep yellows of the back spikes. You may be all able to tell also that these two dragons are different colors. There's more of a yellow tinge to this one. That's because these dragons do have some tones in the actual dragon scales, some tans and some yellows on Feroce, some teals on Nadra, some oranges on Dinral, and I wanted to try to mimic that with the paints, and I don't think I quite like how it looks. It does make the main body glow more under the UV light, but I think there's something nice about just the spikes glowing and the body kind of disappearing. So I don't know, I may do some more experimentation with this, but the way how it changes the body color, I don't know if I like that too much. Moving on to Nadra here, I found this blue that is also quite translucent, but you may be able to tell the difference between these two. It does darken this blue on the horn and the back spikes quite a bit, but I actually think it gets it a little closer to the reference art. So I don't mind that at all. And again, it shines really, really well under the UV light. So I can make that trade-off no problem. I think you can tell I've only painted this one spike here and the rest are unpainted. So you can see just how well it glows compared to the others. Same with Dinral on the back. You can see I've only done the tail and that one spike. And that is actually using this orange neon Sharpie. So this is not marketed to glow under a UV light, but their neon formula just happens to glow really, really well. So I've used that, and I think I'll use that for the final Dinral as well. You can see that I've also experimented with doing some of the face painting for this one. I think I'll do that all the way across, as well as some of the shading on the belly and the limbs. I'll need to do some shadows and some darker areas in here. Maybe paint the nails as well. I kind of like how it looks on this one, but I'm not sold overall. So I need to do some more painting and get back to it, but that's where we are so far. But all that work so far has been for the original 3 dragons, and we haven't even talked about the light dragon from Tears of the Kingdom. And honestly, it's one of the cooler designs. And I know you saw the thumbnail, so let's make it. Luckily for me, all of the dragons share the same basic body, and it's just the head that I need to get rid of and change. So I started with the mane, which is a little bit bigger than the other manes, and it's a lot more rounded. And then I added on the light dragon's head, which is pointier and a little more vulpine looking. It's also got some fuzz texture to it. And then last but not least, I also had to add the horns, which are really thin and delicate. In fact, I actually had some trouble printing them out.
The support broke, but it looks like I might have saved it.
I just so happened to be looking at the right time, and I noticed the issue before it was too late. so I could pause the print and build up a fake support tower out of hot glue and failed prints, and it looks like I got that to the right height for it to build off of and complete the print without any flaws. But you might notice that the horns are a little too dark compared to the in-game model. That is this top version here. I printed this one way back when I was only doing the 2 colors for the original 3 dragons, and I only had this darker teal. I figured I could use it for the horns, and it would be close enough. But when I had to start over with these 3, I figured that the lighter color I had to get for Naedra anyway would be a better fit for the light dragon's horns, like you can see here. And I gotta take it one step further, of course. For this one, you can see that the limbs and the belly are a slightly darker shade compared to the face, where they're the same shade for this one. And that's because I was previously limited to 4 colors with my AMS, but this one uses 5 colors. But technically, I have 2 AMSs and a splitter, so I managed to rig those together and get 8 color printing capability without having to purchase an actual dual hub to use the 2 AMS units simultaneously. Fortunately, it worked out. And I could not be more thrilled with how this came out. It printed flawlessly and the colors are spot on. And while I take some time to remove this from the build plate and take off all of the supports, I did just want to say, there are so many 3D printed dragons, and I don't mean to contribute to an already oversaturated space, especially one that is often criticized for taking so little effort and exemplifying the issue of mass-produced 3D printed slop. I love the Zelda series and the design of these dragons, and I really challenged myself to sculpt and design this build. Yes, they are dragons, yes, they need to articulate, and yes, they need to be printed in place, but hopefully enough of my personal touch and creativity is shining through. Interested to hear your thoughts. And segue time, speaking of personal touches, I actually sculpted the eyes separately since they're much more of a defining feature on the light dragon, and there's no way I would be able to print these thin, delicate eyelashes on my FDM printer. And as much as I don't like using it, I do have a resin printer that I can use to print the eyes. And because the resolution is so much higher, I should be able to print those eyelashes no problem. And after what feels like way too much time for such a small part, I do have 2 really nice looking eyes. So I cleaned those with some isopropyl alcohol, and now I need to do a secondary cure out in the sunlight. And that actually is going a little too slow for me, so I hit it with some supplementary UV light to speed up that process. So with those eyes nice and cured, and with us already being out in the garage, I decided to go ahead and hit those with some gold spray paint, just to serve as a foundation for the rest of the paint and be the overall final paint color for the eyelashes. For the actual irises, those consist of 3 concentric rings, starting with a violety purple and then moving on to a deep blue, followed by a green. So I go ahead and I paint on those circles to the best of my ability. And painting has never been my strong suit, but I am pretty satisfied with how these came out. So now I just have to glue them onto the dragon. And for that, I'm just using a super glue, and I've chosen a really thick super glue because I think the gel will help hold the eye in place while the glue cures. I don't think I need to use really any clamping pressure at all since these eyes aren't going to be coming up against any force. So really I'm just putting some glue in the eye socket, putting the eye in, and then waiting for the glue to cure. I could use a super glue activator to speed that process up, but I do think that could ruin the paint job, so I'm going to avoid it this time. And that is all 4 dragons complete, which means I gotta stop procrastinating on the mechanism. And of course, I'm going to design that in Tinkercad. I just find that it's a lot easier to design these more dimensionally accurate geometric parts in Tinkercad compared to the more organic style of designing in Nomad Sculpt. And here's what I came up with. So here's our first prototype, and it's a little boxy, but really this is just a proof of concept for this main internal mechanism. The general idea is that there is this hand crank here that turns this internal axle, and the axle has all of these wheels on it. And the wheels are mounted off center, which means that I just need to rotate them along the axle, and I can really finely adjust the movement that I'm getting out of them. And the movement that I'm looking for happens with these rods. Basically, the rods are meant to ride in the channel of the wheels so that when I turn the axle, they lift up and down, translating that rotational movement into a linear up and down movement that will give us that sinusoidal wave that we're looking for in the dragon's flight path. And really, it's a simple concept, but there are a few issues. For one, the main axle is too thin and flimsy. I need to thicken that up. 2, hand crank is comically small, but that's an easy fix. Number 3, I neglected to put any sort of an end cap to keep the axle from falling out. And then number 4, the main issue is that these rods are too thin. Not only that, but the shape where they interface with the wheels tends to bind as well, so that when you turn the crank, they catch and bend rather than riding in that channel. So definitely a big issue, but I was able to fix it with the second prototype. You can see that I slimmed it down significantly to save on plastic. But basically, I swapped out the rod shape for a thicker design, and I changed the end where it interfaces with the wheel into this like shuffleboard design, which rides really nicely in the wheel and gives you that linear up and down movement that I was talking about. And since I was happy with this, I was able to print out the full one. And if I turn the hand crank, you can see that all of the rods are moving up and down just like we designed. And I'm pretty happy with that. Actually, there is also some side-to-side movement because of that shuffleboard handle shape. And I kind of like that. I think that gives more of an organic and natural feel to the flight pattern of the dragons. I do think the side-to-side movement is a little too much, so I need to make these holes a little tighter to limit that movement. But otherwise, I think this is a pretty good proof of concept. And I think we can move on to making the real thing. So here's the next prototype, and I'm sure you've noticed the duct tape, but don't worry, that is temporary. Basically, I had to separate the model into two pieces. Otherwise, there is no way to get these shuffleboard rods in and out. So once they're all in place, I can go ahead and super glue that and secure that connection. A couple other changes that I did want to mention are that I made the crank handle a little bit bigger. I added an end cap so that the axle doesn't fall out. And I adjusted some tolerances so that there's a lot less friction in the axle of the machine. I also changed these holes so that there is much less side-to-side movement. And I think there's still enough that the flight should look really nice and organic, but there isn't an excessive amount anymore. I printed this in an off-white because I wanted it to contrast against the bright white of the dragon scales. And I thought this looked like a good cloud color to give the illusion that they're flying through the sky. I went ahead and printed some clouds that will eventually cover the internal mechanism, and I can just glue that in place once it's all assembled. There is one issue that I still want to solve though, and I think that's because there are too many rods. I was finding that when I would turn the crank with a dragon on it, some of the rods wouldn't fall all the way back down, and I think there was just too much friction from the segments that were binding the rods. Right now there is a rod for every segment of the dragon's body, and having them bind like that was really killing the illusion. And I think I can get away with half as many. So I redesigned the top portion to only fit 6 compared to the 11 that are there now. And I reprinted the base with some pegs that should interface nicely with these holes. So once I swap over the internal mechanisms, I should be able to just click everything into place. The last thing I wanted to mention is that I swapped out the PLA rods for some clear PETG, which is fairly transparent. I was hoping that would help them kind of blend in and hide a little bit better. And it does work pretty well. There are some layer lines that still catch on the light, but otherwise I think they blend in a lot better than the PLA did. So all I have to do now is assemble it, and I think we should be done. Now here are the 4 mythical dragons from The Legend of Zelda as Automata. I had to get the little butt wiggle in the end there. And again, that's because of that side-to-side movement of the mechanism. But what did you think? I love it. I am so stoked with how it came out, and I had such a fun time on this project. And although I should have had the confidence to add it to the block years ago, it's never too late, and it is there now. So we can check this one off the list. And now for the giveaway. First, what am I giving away? Well, that would be all of my practice pieces. That is 13 chances to win if I remember correctly. That could be anything from the single color prints that I used to dial in the size of the dragons to some dual colored prints that again were the wrong color of filament. I even have some 3-color prints in there of every dragon, and the only reason that I didn't use those is because I forgot to model in the holes where it mounts to the Automaton, so they're perfectly fine otherwise. I also have the light dragon print that had the horns that were a little too dark. And I don't have eyes for it, but I can absolutely print and paint some eyes for the person who wins that one. Some of the dragons are test pieces, so they might have some flaws in the prints or they might have some painting that's unfinished. I also have some that have random spots of glowing paint, so you might get a little bit of a surprise under UV light. And entering is super simple. All you have to do is leave a comment with hashtag giveaway. Anything else you write in the comment is totally fine as long as you have that word. And yeah, we're going old school with the hashtag. #, number sign, Octothorpe, whatever works, just hashtag giveaway. I do need to mention, unfortunately, that I can only ship these prizes within the contiguous United States, so my apologies to anybody outside of that range. And there will be some more terms listed in the description, but they're not all that complicated. And for those of you who do not want to participate in the giveaway, unfortunately, since these designs are Nintendo property, I am unable to sell these models. However, I do offer all of my 3D printing models that I've designed myself, including the base for the Automaton, as a perk for my channel memberships. So be sure to check those out if you're interested in anything I've designed. It's pretty much yours. Thank you to new member Landon Purifoy. Yes, that Landon Purifoy. And of course, thank you to my longtime supporters, Thad Carpenter and Thomas Computes. Again, your support goes so far and I really appreciate it. And to everyone else, thank you so much for staying to the end and subscribing. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Heck yeah, look at you. Only the true fans have what it takes to make it to the end, and you did that. Appreciate it. If you like that video and you like Zelda builds, you might like my life-size builds of the Zora Fishbone guitar and the Zora Crab bass. I got both of those on the playlist and another video on the left that I think you might like too. Check it out. And click the circle in the center to subscribe. Love you.
Blop.